So who watches the Sylvan Watchers? Hello everyone, this is Bront, CatHerder, and we're talking Raid Shadow Legends, having some fun with the DERP method of going through Faction Wars, and we're talking the Sylvan Watchers this time. Sylvan Watchers is the newest faction for Faction Wars, so they are the one probably with the least content on the internet, which makes this video probably more important. It has been a little frustrating for me because unlike some of the other factions where I learned a lot of the champions through trial and error and testing out and seeing who I could use, as well as research with their videos, there's not a lot on Sylvan Watchers here. A lot of the champions are new. A lot of them I don't have experience with. And to be fair, a lot of people with endgame accounts have not really paid a lot of attention to the rares and the epics. So overall, there's a lot more work going into dealing with the Sylvan Watchers. It also means that when I usually like to show my team and how much effort it took for me to get in there, I don't have that with the Sylvan Watchers. Not because I couldn't take the picture, but because I chose not to, because Sylvan Watchers was pretty much a gimme for me where my account was. I had endgame gear, I had endgame champions, there were guarantees for Elva, who was a hard carry. There were lots of factors for me getting the champions I needed that made it easier, because as they expanded into Sylvan Watchers, they made it easier to get the Sylvan Watchers initially. So now that they're no longer doing that, they've got a pretty decent filled out roster, and the faction is regular everyday faction wars for most people. Let's get into it and take a look and see what you can do to build a Sylvan Watchers faction to get yourself through Faction Wars 21. But first, let's go take a look and make sure what the DERP method is and what we're thinking about when we're building these teams. We are looking to include damage dealers because you kind of want to kill your enemies. It makes a lot of sense. Enhancers, which are the champions that buff you or debuff your enemies to help you do more damage. You have revivers because you're looking for 3 stars and it's very difficult to keep all your champions alive all the time. So the revivers are a great emergency valve, at least early on. Eventually you don't need them, but sometimes they still help. And then finally, the protectors. These are the champions that heal you, buff you, offer control of the waves, debuff the waves so that they don't do as much damage, help keep you alive in ways that you don't need the revivers, at least don't need the revivers constantly. So let's go take a look at the Sylvan Watcher rares. So the Sylvan Watcher rares are still being filled out. There's not a lot of them. In fact, there's only 7 of them here. You've only got 1 or 2 in most cases with the particular affinities. The good news is that because Polarium's gotten better at making champions, these champions are generally better overall than some of the champions were as far as the rares in other factions. So you've got Pathfinder Kate, who does a chance to lock out other champions with an AoE cooldown reduction, or cooldown increase, I should say. She also can do a decent amount of damage, and she veils herself, so she's got some protection as well. You've got Bowsmith Flannan, who does some protection with decreased speed, as well as a very good stun on his A1, especially for a rare. In fact, he's such a good champion that I know Ash did a video on him. There's actually some uses of him in Centranos in some of the Soulcrossed areas as well. So he's a very good champion overall, probably well worth building. I don't know if he's going to be in your Faction Wars 16, but he should provide a lot of tankiness and some additional support, and he actually hits fairly hard as well. And finally, Tyrlock provides increased speed for your entire team while also doing a decent amount of AoE damage, throwing veils out there as well to protect the rest of your team, and doing some damage reduction with those veils. And then finally, the best non-legendary reviver is Not. Not has a 5-turn cooldown, 2 champion, heal, revive, 25% turn meter, 25% health, and a shield that's about 20 to 25% of their max HP. It's not the best revive, but he's a rare reviver. He's got a nice Faction Wars 20% speed aura. He's a very good reviver overall. His revive is in the power of champions like Melga from the Dwarves, and Melga is considered one of the good faction revivers and very useful. The other thing that Not brings, which is the reason I like him better than the Epic Reviver, is Not brings some healing on his A2, which means that there's chances that he will not need his revive quite as often because you have some healing as well. So Not is a very good champion to build for Faction Wars as well. All right, so we got a lot of different epics here, and I'm actually going to mention specifically Cormac is the only epic here that I have really not talked about much. because Cormac is honestly one of the worst epics in the game. He is just really bad. His kit doesn't make a lot of sense. I would avoid using him, building him, use him as a chicken if you have to. He's really kind of that bad. On the other end of this, we have Rider Dythe. Rider Dythe is one of the best epics you're going to find. Rider Dythe does an increased accuracy on himself, so you can build him with a little less accuracy if you need to. He also has a nice accuracy aura. He then gives himself another turn. He then does an AoE attack that can hit very hard that also puts decreased defense out there. And if he puts decreased defense out 100%, so he gets everybody out there and applies decreased defense, he then gets another turn. And then he has an A1 that hits fairly hard that can also grant him a chance for another turn. If you can stick him in Relentless gear, he'll get turn after turn after turn after turn. He naturally can get 3 turns on his first turn in his kit without the Relentless gear. The Relentless gear helps if he doesn't apply a decreased defense for some reason, maybe because it hasn't even worn off on one of the champions, or maybe he got a weak hit. He also can get that extra attack on his A1, keep on cycling through his turns. Now, it does mean he burns off some protection buffs, so that's possibly worrisome. But overall, he can do an awful lot of damage in a very short period of time by taking 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 turns in a row. And it's not unheard of for him to take more than 5 turns in a row. Very good champion. He also does a lot of damage, well worth building, and probably the damage dealer of this faction. But other champions, Arwid is actually new from the Wixwell fusion, which is currently happening right now. She does decent damage multipliers. Got a few other things in her kit as well. Looks like she should be a very good champion. So well worth building for some damage. Ruella is a single target damage dealer, but she can hit really hard. But she also brings decreased defense and decreased speed, and also does some turn meter boosting as well. So she can enhance your team as well as making certain targets easier to kill. She's really more of a boss slayer, and particularly also very good against the Fire Knight. But overall, Ruella's got a great kit and is a very useful champion, particularly for the bosses in this faction. Kellen the Shrike is not a bad champion. I guess he's one of the champions you can get from some of the newer codes out there. He does a decent amount of damage. I'm not going to say it's a great amount of damage, but not bad. Some decent AoEs, some decent A1s, worth building for some damage if you need some damage. Ornn, I'm kind of torn on. Ornn does okay damage and can solo stuff with all of his poisons. He throws out poisons, and when poisons are triggered, either through himself or he triggers poisons just because the opponent takes a turn, he starts increasing his own HP. So he's good for being a solo champ for low to mid-range dungeons. He is an okay damage dealer, but he only puts out 2 poisons and an increase a poison sensitivity, and he only does it about a 75, 80, maybe an 85% chance. So he's not even a 100% chance fully booked to do it. It's a little bit of hit or miss as to how well he does the waves. If you get an Ornn, he's probably still worth building because he will actually probably help you in dungeons and anywhere you need poisons, especially if you don't have another poisoner. And he could be a helpful tool in Faction Wars, but I don't think he's good for the end boss and just for the final wave progressions because he doesn't do damage fast enough to really help you with some of the heavier waves like the Sethalias that are also going to be cleansing, for example. Lochwain is a general decent damage dealer, decent champ, not bad to build, also good for building for Mikage, so you're going to have to 5-star and fully ascend him anyway. So if you need to build him for damage for a while, build him for damage and use him for damage. Not a bad trade-off, and then you can eventually use him for Mikage as well. And a Moonbeam also can do a decent amount of damage, a little less AoE, a little more single targety damage, but hits fairly hard. Probably not the best champion, but I'm bringing up a lot of the damage dealers here because the damage dealing is mostly in the epic category in this faction. The legendaries actually lack a lot of damage, which is pretty unusual for the way the factions are broken down so far. Otherwise, enhancers, we already mentioned Dythe and Ruella. We got to mention White Dryad Nia, one of the Voids. She is an absolutely amazing champion. She can be put in stun set and has an AoE A1 that also has a decreased speed on it. And that can be great for getting through waves in Faction Wars. Controlling the waves gives you a lot of extra control. even if you decide to put her in something else, and there's reasons to put her in something else, she still gives you a lot of control with AoE decreased speed. What she also can do is she can also take one champion and reduce a cooldown by 2 turns. So she can take a champion, and if you're struggling to keep people alive, you can put a reviver cooldown off. That could be helpful. She also does a big heal with that. And if she gets some healing, any surplus healing then spreads to everybody else. So you can put Nia in something like immortal gear or in regeneration gear or bolster gear or something that helps heal her some HP. And as long as she's got extra HP to spread around, she spreads that heal to everyone else as well. It's not going to be a massive heal, but little bits of heal, getting 1,000 here, 1,000 there, can make a huge difference in surviving versus not surviving in faction wars. So overall, she's got a very useful kit. She also has ally protection and a small strengthen, all of which are very, very good for surviving some of the bosses as well. Renan is the reviver in the epics. He also brings an increased speed and an increased turn meter on the A1. As a reviver, she is not as good as Not because she doesn't do the healing, and her revive is not as good as Not's revive, in my opinion. It puts a very similar amount of turn meter and HP on, and then puts a continuous heal on them, which is fine, but the continuous heal means they need to take a turn before so they don't die, whereas Not provides a shield, which is additional protection so that they don't die in the first place. So that's why I prefer Not over Renan, but Renan has some of the turn meter control, so Renan is not a bad champion to build either. If you're struggling with faction wars, 2 revivers is a viable strategy. Not and Renan would be a very good combination as well if you're really kind of struggling and you need both revivers. And then finally on the enhancers, we've got Ayla. Ayla's got a unique passive where she will instantly give somebody an additional turn. It's a 12% activation. I believe it's got a 1-turn cooldown on that. I've not played with it, but it's got some potential to give extra turns to champions when they take their actions, which could be helpful for like your Dythe when you're going on a run and he does another chance to do his attacks so you can do extra damage. Get your cooldowns dropped a little bit on a reviver that takes an extra turn, especially if you have somebody like a Renan or a Not, where they also can do some healing or some turn meter control. So very, very interesting ability. And then there's some additional protections and debuffs that they've got as far as AoEs are concerned as well. So Ayla's not a bad champion. Pan, as far as a protector goes, throws some freezes out there. He's a design champion for hard Fire Knight, so he's got a lot of freezes. He's got some speed meter, turn meter control stuff. Decent champion for protectors, probably one of the lesser used ones as far as I'm concerned. Croydian, another champion for hard Fire Knight. Croydian's very good. He's got an AoE freeze at a decent rate, and then he's got an A1 freeze at a decent rate as well. So overall, he can be very useful in controlling the waves, keeping him frozen. Now, freeze can be a double-edged sword because when somebody's frozen, they're only taking 80% of the damage instead of 100%, so it makes the waves take longer. So it's going to slow down your time just a little bit, and because they might survive while they're frozen, there's a chance, or they can get cleansed or something like that. There's always the chance of losing control anyway. But overall, if you've got a Croydian, he's probably not a bad champion to build. He can help move you into hard Fire Knight. Overall, good protection. And then finally, Duden. I'm not a huge fan of this dude, but he's growing on me a little bit. He's got an A1 that has a chance to do a cleanse on everybody on your team, but he also has a counter attack, so he's constantly doing the A1. And then on top of that, he's got one of the taunt abilities. He's one of the few champions with taunt. So he's forcing people to attack him. And when they attack him, he gets a counterattack. And when he counterattacks, he can cleanse. So from that perspective, he's got a decent amount of protection and cleansing in his kit. Now it's a little RNG because you're certainly waiting for people to smack him, so that's a problem. But he can be pretty tanky. He's an HP champion. He's got some extra abilities to keep him alive. Overall, not a bad champion. So that covers most of the epics. Let's go take a look at the legendaries. All right, there is a wide variety of support legendaries here in Sylvan Watchers. A lot of protectors, a few enhancers. You've got a reviver, and you've got a little bit of damage. So let's just start. Let's go from left to right. So we got Elva. Elva is an amazing champion. Elva is to Sylvan Watchers what Syl is to the Barbarians. She brings a heal when you take a turn. It's very similar to Siphi. She brings an AoE cleanse with block debuffs and increased speed. Very similar to Siphi, except for without the cleanse on a shorter cooldown. She brings continual heals on her A1. She throws Veils out there as well. She is a very well-rounded, one of the better legendaries to support in the game. She is a hard carry. If you get an Elva, you have mostly solved your Faction Wars woes because she'll take a team that shouldn't be passing and will help it pass with 3 stars. Very, very good champion. King Alkabar, he's an interesting champion. He can strip buffs, turn them into poisons, and place block buffs. And then he can strip debuffs off your team, cleanse them, provide continuous heals, put a big shield up, and overall he does okay-ish damage. He's a very, very good support. I put him in the damage category as well because if you're dealing with a lot of buffs, particularly with champions like in the Valkyrie waves, he could be super hard carry against the Valkyrie waves because he's the right affinity to strip them easily, throw a bunch of poisons up there instead, and prevent them from getting more shields and other buffs out there. So he is a very, very good champion to bring. The big problem is that he's very reliant on either your team getting debuffed so he can cleanse it for the heals, or for your team, the enemy team, to get buffs so he can strip them and put poisons out there for his actual damage. But he's a good support. He keeps you alive. Very good. Oella, pretty unique champion. She's got an increased defense and a chunky heal. And then she's also got a buff turn increase on one of her skills. She's actually pretty good for Ice Golem. I've used her for Ice Golem on both of my accounts. She's actually a pretty solid champion for that. She's got some good healing ability. She's got some emergency heals and a passive as well. Is she the greatest champion? Probably not. But if you get an Oella, she can help you carry through Faction Wars, even unbooked, because she can give you a lot of healing. And she doesn't take a lot of books to book up, and she's worth it for hard ice golems. So I would definitely look into building an Oella if I had one. Ruark, he's a bit of a protector. He's got the taunt ability on him as well. 2-turn cooldown, 2-turn, actually it's a 4-turn cooldown. It lasts for 2 turns. Overall, he's fairly tanky. He can help provide some tank ability to your team. And of course, with the taunt, he can be very helpful as well. Probably overall, not the best of the legendaries. And I would question whether or not he's probably worth building on your account, depending on what you're looking for. Saoirse is the pay-to-win champion. If you spend money, you will eventually get Saoirse. If you don't spend money, Saoirse will take forever. She's the Polarium Points Rewards champion. She is not very good. There are epics that do burns better than she does. She doesn't provide a lot else in her kit. Saoirse I wouldn't build even if you got her. And if you got her, you're spending money. You probably have better champions, so you're probably not worried about this as much. Ostred was the previous fusion from just a little while ago over Easter. Ostred is a great champion. She fills some of the roles that Arbiter, Nekmothar, Lysandra kind of fill. So she gives you a bunch of turn meter boosting. She gives you some increased accuracy. She gives you actually a bunch of healing as well. She even has some sleep mechanics on her as well for some control. She is a wonderful, wonderful champion. Very good in Hydra. I haven't pulled mine yet because it was a fragment on this account, but she is a good champion. If you have her, she will help you with Faction Wars. Definitely worth building. And honestly, she's a good arena champion as well, and she's a good Hydra champion. And in fact, I think a little underappreciated. So Glycad is a interesting new champion. He's got some freezes on his A1s, and he's got a bunch of veils on his A3, very Duchess-like veils that he throws up there. He also does some reviving as well. Very good champion for support overall. He's not going to do a lot of damage for you, but if you get a Glycad again, that's probably going to help carry you through Faction Wars. Lady Areth, not great, but if you need healing, She's of the Oella level of healing, but really without much else that she brings overall. I'm not a big fan of Lady Areth. Firol is another Duchess-like champion, provides some revival, provides some veils. Um, very, very good champ, provides some increased attack as well, so he can actually do you some enhancement and that'll help you with some damage as well. If you get a Firol, definitely build him. He is a mega carry in Hydra as well. Very good champion overall. Padraig is one of the damage dealing champs I have listed because he's got an ally attack. So his ally attack is actually really good. It's an ally attack with absolutely everybody, also provides continuous heals on everybody, and also gets rid of max HP loss that you might have on your champions, which is probably not going to be a major issue in Faction Wars, but it's still nice to have. And then the continuous heal is kind of nice. So he gives you a little bit of healing. He gives you a bunch of speed increase with turn meter boost. He gives some cleansing as well. He does some skill reset in his A1. He's a beast of a champion, well worth building if you've got him. Allele is one of the few damage dealers that can ignore Stone Skin. He doesn't hit as hard as he probably needs to ignore Stone Skin to actually be good at it. But if you need damage, and there's not a lot of damage dealers in this faction, he is one of the damage dealers. He'll help you by dealing damage, which, he's a damage dealer. It's kind of what they do. So maybe build him. I don't know if I'd book him. I don't know if I'd invest a lot into him. That said, if you don't have a Stone Skin counter for Arena, he could be an interesting Stone Skin counter for you for Rita. Claydna just got buffed, so she does a lot more. She does some sleepage, she does some cleansing, she does some continuous heals, I believe, and then she can do some max HP restore. Probably not a great champion for Faction Wars because a lot of her kit is really resolved around using her in the Sand Devil, but not a bad champion. And then finally, Emic, who is probably one of the best fusions that we've ever had. Emic brings AoE unkillable with a taunt on himself. So he will taunt and then make everyone unkillable, but he'll take a lot of the damage. He constantly gets shields up to improve stuff, and then he can also reset cooldowns slightly on one of his A2s. So overall, Emic provides an awful lot of survivability. And again, if you've got an Emic, you probably mostly solve Faction Wars. Well worth grabbing. But he's a Void Legendary, which means he's going to be definitely hard to get if you didn't do a fusion for him. If you did the fusion for him, great. Hopefully you've also done the fusion for Ostrid, and you've probably got this faction solved pretty easily. Let's go take a look at the boss and see how difficult it is for this faction. So Sylvan Watchers have the red boss, and the red boss, in my opinion, is one of the two hardest bosses in the game to deal with. And that's because he's got a enemy max HP attack that ignores all defense. So he can hit and instantly kill a lot of champions. Now you can get champions that can actually tank this. Ally protection is a very, very good way to deal with this. Things like strengthen can help a lot. Shields can help a lot. And the good news with this faction is there's an awful lot of protection, which means you have an awful lot of ways to mitigate that max HP hit. He also stuns and true fears a bunch of people. So what he generally does is he takes a turn, stuns everybody, but puts true fear on the one champion he's going to attack, which is random. He then will attack that champion with his A1, and then he basically cycles around and takes different turns as he goes. And when you do damage to him, it fills his turn meter. So he generally will get at least one turn, if not two, unless you've somehow got a way to control his turn meter, outspeed him incredibly. It's very difficult. So the good news is this faction is a speed faction. There's an awful lot of turn meter manipulation, turn meter addition, increased speed. There's an awful lot of block debuffs. There's an awful lot of cleansing going on in this faction. There's an awful lot of protection overall, things like ally protection, shields. So this faction is kind of built to tackle this boss, but you still kind of need a team to go at it. So let's go take a look at what the overall recommendations are, and let's put together a sample team, and I'll even talk a little bit on that screen about what I used. I don't have a screenshot of it, so we'll talk a little bit about what I used, and again, why I'm not going to actually talk about my team too much. All right, so if we look at the recommendations overall, you can see that there's not a lot of damage with the legendaries, and the damage you're basically leaning on is going to be in your epics, and even maybe even your rares. There's a couple of enhancers. It's actually a pretty solid lineup considering how few champions there are. There's actually a wide variety of revivers. In fact, forgot to put Glaciate on there as well. I did double check, and Feral does not have any revivals. He still has a lot of extra protection, so he's still definitely a champion worth building. But overall, there's actually a decent amount of revival. You've got a couple of different really good revivers. Elva's only a single target reviver, but it's on a 3-turn cooldown. It's a great revive. Glycad's got an AoE revive. Not's got a 2-target revive, so does Renan. So overall, running 2 revivers or just an Elva or Glycad would be just fine. Overall, we've got a bunch of different protectors, so you're certainly going to be looking at different protectors for which ones that give you the most. My sample team here is Dythy, who I think is probably the best damage dealer in this faction overall. He doesn't necessarily hit the hardest out of any of the champions here, but he can get extra turns, which means he can hit the hardest in the shortest period of time. Morella can actually hit very hard as well, gives you additional damage, but also brings you the increased turn meter as well as some debuffs that you can target against specific champions to take specific ones out earlier, which can help in faction wars. And then Not gives you a lot of healing as well as a good revive. Outside of those 3, which I think is a good core, you've got Duden or Nia. Duden can give you a decent amount of protection. He can actually be very useful against the boss, because if you can get his taunt out before the boss takes a turn, he'll stun a bunch of people, but he'll then target Duden, who can usually take the hit versus other champions that may not be able to. So taunt can be very useful against the boss on this, so that's a reason to possibly take Duden. Nea gives you a bunch of healing, the turn meter, not the turn meter, the skill reset ability, and ally protection. And the ally protection is well worth it for that boss as well. That's one of the better ways to counter that boss as well. And then finally, if you have a Lego, you're probably going to take the legendary with you. I know it's kind of a given, but in this faction, there's a lot of room for a lot of different support Legos that all will help keep you alive. And then Renan is an option if you don't get one of those support Legos to help keep you alive as a secondary reviver. So in discussing my team, which I don't need to go to the slide for that, I had an Elva, made it very easy. I had a Dythy in Relentless Gear. He did all my damage. I had Morella, which was certainly helpful. I believe I had Naya, who helped keep the waves under control. And then finally, I think I pulled a King G, so I had him as well, and he helped a ton. I don't remember my team entirely. They've actually almost doubled the roster of Sylvan Watchers factions went since then, but my team was a speed run on full auto because I had the gear to just full auto it without a problem. As far as you, if you're not having been able to do that because you haven't gotten lucky or you have to build a team, it's going to take a little while. Dythy does decent damage, but he can be very bursty and a little RNG, especially because some of his turns only have a chance of triggering those extra turns. Plus, if you don't have really good Relentless Gear, you're going to struggle getting him in Relentless Gear with the accuracy and the crit damage you need to be able to actually really shine from a damage dealing perspective. And if you can't do that and you have to put him Perception and just make him fast, that's fine too. Rella, again, she needs to be fast. Not, you're probably going to want to build in your regeneration gear. Nia in regeneration gear or stun sets, very good. Duoden, keeping him alive can be key. And then Renan again as a reviver, you're going to keep her in revival gear. And again, there's so many support Legos that will help you in this faction. Any support Lego will do. And if you get a damage dealer, you get a damage dealer instead, and they'll also still help you clear the faction a lot faster. Extra damage dealers generally mean you don't need as much of the other stuff. Hopefully this has been helpful. It's been a deep dive into Sylvan Watchers. It's definitely been a lot of research on my end, and I loved looking at this, breaking it down. I consider it a challenge to get through a lot of this gear. That's why I really like Faction Wars, and hopefully that enthusiasm and knowledge is helping you guys out. So until next time, I'm Bront CatHerder.